Sometimes when you're traveling, the sky just doesn't cooperate. But with a stitched panorama and some careful masking, you can still bring an image to life. Hello everyone and welcome back. Bamburgh Castle has to be one of the most dramatic fortresses in all of England, perched high above the North Sea on this incredible stretch of coastline. Now it is that dramatic story of the castle guarding against raiders from the sea that I wanted to capture, which obviously meant I needed both the building and the coastline in the shot. Now I figured the best way to tell that story was from above. So I took my Air 2S drone up at dusk and I shot 5 images with the intention of stitching them together later on in the computer. The reason I chose dusk was simple. I wanted that warm glow from the castle lights contrasting nicely against the sea, the sky and the coastline. So let's jump into the edit in Bridge and Adobe Camera Raw and assemble this panorama. Now flying the Air 2S, what I've done is I've shot many images around the castle. Just as it was getting dusk though, I decided to shoot a panorama which also included the Farne Islands in the background. So I've got 5 images here that I'd like to stitch together. So let's select those and we'll load them into Camera Raw. And you'll notice that unfortunately, this was another one of those occasions where when I was visiting, I wasn't blessed with a really interesting sunset. I went back a couple of times and each time I didn't get a particularly interesting sunset. So I'm shooting here as the lights have come on in the castle. You'll notice my ISO has had to be pushed up to ISO 400 on the Air 2S. And I'm shooting at a 13th of a second. So the very first thing I do on all the images is check at 100% to see that I've got crisp shots. Windy coastline, low light, flying the drone, obviously that's a concern. So I have checked all these, they are all sharp. So the next thing I'm going to do, rather than do any of the adjustments to the individual images, I'm going to create my panorama first of all. I select all of the images in the film strip, come down to Merge Panorama, or you can just press Command M. Now it won't be able to detect the lens because it doesn't know the lens that the Air 2S is using, even though it knows it's an 8.4mm, based on the sensor size obviously. But it won't be able to select the actual appropriate lens profile. Well, that's fine, we won't worry about that. You just press OK. And now I have my panoramic image merged together. I'm going to use the boundary warp to just stretch the corners. And I'm probably going to crop this a little anyway, but this just corrects the distortion by using the boundary warp. And I'm happy with the cylindrical projection. Spherical would just narrow the field of view of that a little bit more. Perspective simply wouldn't work with this image. Now let's click Merge, and it will ask me where I wish to save it. That's fine, I'll save it there. And that's the image now ready to start work on. Now, first thing I want to do is I'm going to leave the color anyway, because this is largely going to be an image that I'm going to correct using masks. So the first thing we want to do is the global adjustments. Let's bring up the exposure very slightly, increase our contrast, drop back our highlights. We're going to work on the sky separately anyway. Bring up the shadows and push the whites and pull the blacks. That's just giving me a little bit of overall contrast. Let's push up some clarity, and again we're going to add more with masks later, but clarity being mid-tone contrast, it just gives what I call crunch to my image. If we do a before and after, we can see it's just starting to look a little bit more interesting. Coming down, I do want to actually denoise this because this was shot at ISO 400. And you can see that it is that little bit noisy. I don't know if it was perceptible on the YouTube video, but it is a little bit noisy. So I do want to denoise. This might take a while, so I will get back to you when this is done. And that's now a much cleaner image that we can continue to work with. Now, that's pretty much all I want to do insofar as the global adjustments are concerned. Now we really need to get to work with masks, and this is what this image is all about. So working top to bottom, I'm going to work on the sky first of all, and let's drop the highlights back on that. So we'll bring some life back into the sky, push the whites up a little, drop the blacks back to bring back some contrast, and I'm going to lower the exposure a little bit too. It was a dull dusk at the time I was shooting this, but that's looking better. Now, the next thing I want to do is work on the the castle itself. The castle, you might notice, it's got a little bit of a colour tinge, a little bit of a magenta tinge to it, and the image looks a little bit strange. So before we mask, let's see what we can do with the overall colour temperature. Now, I set the Air 2S to shoot at 55 Kelvin, which is daylight, so I don't know why it's come up like that in Camera Raw, because I do like to set it to a single white balance so I can adjust from there. Now I'm going to take it up to 55 Kelvin, which is the daylight, and I'm going to drop the tint back a little bit to take some of the magenta out. That's not bad. Okay, back to our masks. Now let's mask the castle. I'm going to do that using a brush. So I select my brush tool, and I can make this bigger or smaller using the left or right square brackets, and using the shift and left or right square brackets makes the brush harder or softer. We'll make it a little bit harder, and we'll just brush over the castle here. What I want to do is create a sense of the sort of nice warm glow. Brighten it up a little bit, bring up the color temperature, warm it up a little bit. And do I need to drop? I might drop a little bit of the tint out, a little bit of the magenta tint out. Bring up the color to make it a bit warmer still. That's not bad. A little bit of shadow detail. Drop back some blacks a little, push the whites a little. When I do that, as you've noticed in previous videos, it just gives me that contrast, and that's the way I like to do it. It's just my preferred way of working for increasing contrast. Let's see what we've got here. That's looking much better. It's looking like that nighttime feel that I'm wanting. I don't mind it spilling over into the fields outside, because there are lights illuminating the castle. If I wanted to remove that, I could do just simply by brushing it, but I quite like that feel of it moving across into the grassland. Okay, that's not bad. Now, having done that, I'm slightly, as I look at it, obviously I'm considering the whole image as a whole, I'm still slightly concerned with how dull it is over this side of the image. So let's go back to the sky. And first thing I'm going to do is just drop back the exposure a little bit more. That's a bit better. Okay, so I don't mind working on separate masks, because it just gives me a little bit more flexibility. And now I'm going to create another mask, which is going to be a radial gradient. Let's just see if I bring up a radial gradient here in the left-hand corner, drag it across the sky. What I'm thinking about here is just adding a sort of a fake sunset feel to the image. So I'm just going to warm it up slightly here and add that sort of purple tinge, which just, I think that's more interesting. It certainly makes us a little more interesting in the corner of the sky there. It's just coming across. So let's just see what that looks without that. I think that gives me a sort of a more interesting feel to my overall castle shot. So yeah, let's do a before and after there. I think that's getting close to what I've got in mind. Now, back to masking. I have a number of things I want to do. First of all, let's do a linear gradient here, because I just don't want this area to be so prevalent or to draw the eye as much. It's not as interesting. So let's just drop the exposure back there. I will vignette it a little bit at the end anyway, but that's better. I'm now not looking directly there. And I might just add another linear gradient as well at the top here. So let's do that again. So another linear gradient, that's probably too aggressive. Let's just bring that up there. So it's a bit more subtle. And yeah, just turn that a little bit, and we'll just drop the exposure back there a touch as well. It's just darkening that off in that corner. Now this area here, it's a little dull. Let's just see if we can't change that as well. So what I'll do here is use the brush tool and make the brush a little bit softer. So shift right square bracket. Let's paint this area in here. And I want to add contrast here, contrast and clarity. So we're going to do that using the whites up, blacks down, darken it down a little bit. Let's add some contrast in terms of the midtones by just crunching that up a little bit. I think that just makes it a little bit more interesting. Let's look at the before and after. Yeah, it just gives it a little bit more bite to that area of the image. So that I'm happy with. I think if we come back to the overall, and this is the way I often work, I'll go backwards and forwards between overall adjustments, because obviously your perception changes as you add masks. Let's add some overall vibrance to the image and some overall saturation. So it's just bring up some colours a little bit more in the image. Vibrance targets the undersaturated colours and protects things like skin tones. Saturation, the saturation slider is obviously a global adjustment. That's not bad. That's giving me a pretty good overall adjustment for the image. There, I'm quite happy with that actually. That's not bad at all. Let's have a look at a before and after. There's a before, there's the after. And I've got that sort of nighttime feel or dusk feel. And it just gives it a nice sort of warm castle glow contrasting with the ocean and the sunset. There's just some final steps before we load this into Photoshop or simply save the image. I did mention I was going to add a vignette, so let's just do that now. We'll add a little bit of vignette to the image, draw the eye in that little bit more to the castle. And I did notice, did I switch that mask? I did. I didn't switch that mask back on, so we'll toggle that back on. And the final thing I want to do is to add a little bit of sharpening. Now, I have denoised the image, but I didn't sharpen it. So what we need to do is grab our masking slider as usual, drag that across to the right. Anywhere that's white will be sharpened, anywhere that's black won't be, so that's pretty good. And just add some sharpening to the image, about 80 to 90 points of sharpening. And that just gives me a nice, crisp final image, which I am happy with. And I think we can now leave that one there. So that's taken a flat dusk panorama and turned it into something a little more atmospheric, with that warm glow from Bamburgh Castle contrasting nicely with the coastline. I really enjoy using masks in my editing, and particularly so in bringing this image to life. I'd love to hear your thoughts. How much do you rely on masking tools in your own edits? Do you use them just for subtle fixes, or do you like pushing them to really transform an image, or do you not even use them at all? Let me know in the comments down below. I love hearing from other photographers. I do read them all. Now, if you're planning your own trip to Bamburgh, then there are 5 travel tips you might find useful. Now, tip number 1, the best time to visit. Now, I know everyone says the same thing, but I would strongly recommend either sunrise or sunset. The soft light makes the castle and coastline look incredible, and you'll often have fewer crowds too, which is useful if you're flying a drone. Now, tip number 2, I'd suggest combining it with a puffin trip. Just offshore, and in fact visible in this image, are the Farne Islands, and June to July is the best time to capture puffins with their beaks full of sand eels, those iconic shots. And my good friend Mark and I actually filmed a whole episode about that for our other channel, World in Focus. And I'll leave a link below or on screen if you'd like to check out our experiences there. Now, tip number 3, explore more castles. Just down the coast is Northumberland Castle, which is equally dramatic in its own way and perfect for coastal walks. And then not far away you also have Alnwick Castle, where part of the Harry Potter series was filmed. Tip number 4, the local food. Don't miss Northumberland's fresh seafood. From simple fish and chips that you can eat in sea houses, to local crab and lobster if you want something really special. And finally, tip number 5, take a side trip to the holy island of Lindisfarne. It's tidal, so you'll need to check safe crossing times, but it's an incredible mix of history and scenery that pairs perfectly with a Bamburgh visit. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this helpful, please give it a like. It really helps the channel. Subscribe if you'd like to see more one-image edits from my travels, and ring the bell so that you don't miss the next one. Safe travels and keep shooting. I'll see you in the next video.